Ladies and gentlemen, hello again, and welcome to another Reflected Reality Simulations video. My name's Graham, this is X-Plane 11 and the Fairchild PT-19 by Uncle Jack Simulations. This is part 4 of the video series, and today we're going to take a look at VFR navigation using the traditional methods. It's a nice day for flying in Norway. We're flying from Kjeller airfield across to Hokksund. Flying time is about 30 minutes. And the weather, visibility is about 9 kilometers. Clouds, we've got few at 2,800 feet, and winds from the northwest around about 10 to 12 knots. So not too bad. One of the perceived issues with flying this sort of aircraft in the simulator is the lack of navigation equipment on board. Sim pilots are very used to flying cross-country using things like the GTN 750 or the GNS 530. The PT-19 doesn't have an electrical system, and even in real life if it was fitted with a battery or a generator, it wouldn't be fitted with a $25,000 IFR navigator, because there's just no point in having something like that in a day VFR aircraft. The GTN 750 is okay for VFR navigation, but the GNS 530 is not very good at all. It doesn't have anything like a terrain base map in the simulator that could be useful for cross-country flying. So if I owned an aircraft like this for real, I would almost certainly navigate using my iPad and an application on there. It's much more cost effective, much more flexible. It means I can do my planning at home and then just come to the airfield, get an aircraft and go fly. But this aircraft originates in the 1940s, and those 1940s pilots didn't have iPads. They simply had the compass and the clock that are fitted to the aircraft. So today we're going to have a look at navigating using the VFR map. The map is very straightforward to use once you've seen how it's done, and it's not entirely obvious. We'll talk about where the map came from a little bit later in the video, but for the time being, let's have a look at the first leg we're flying at the moment. So we're just leaving the traffic pattern at Kjeller. We've climbed up to our cruising altitude of 2,200 feet. We'll use that for the rest of the flight. And we're just essentially following the downwind track, leaving the airfield towards the southeast. What's important is to make sure we've selected a suitable waypoint for the end of the first leg of the flight. We don't know which runway we're going to use to get airborne when we plan the flight. We don't know if there's maybe a slower aircraft ahead that would mean we'd have to overtake or otherwise take a slightly different route. So for the first waypoint, I'm going to choose somewhere that I can navigate to just by looking at the features on the ground. So we're looking at the lakes and the rivers and the roads and navigating, looking at ground features. It's called pilot navigation or pilotage, coming from the nautical term. It gives us the flexibility of leaving the airfield and proceeding in a more or less direct route to somewhere that's where we want to go, somewhere on the route that we want to go. But it doesn't mean that we're stuck having to navigate in a very specific manner from the moment we leave the runway. If you're in a fairly sparsely populated area, somewhere where there aren't really a lot of geographic features, then another option is to leave the airfield, climb away, and then turn around and come back and fly through the airfield overhead and use the airfield itself as the starting point for your compass and clock navigation legs. But that's a lot less efficient. We call the compass and clock navigation dead reckoning, and it simply involves flying a known heading for a known time. We're going to start that at this little island down here at the mouth of the river. You can see it on the chart at the north end of the big lake here. And we've passed over this a few times during the previous flights we've done. We can see it just off the nose of the aircraft at the moment. When we're choosing a waypoint, we want to make sure that we pick something that's going to be easily identifiable and not something that we're going to confuse easily. So we're looking for a very significant geographic feature, something that we can identify by multiple items. So for example, this island we're looking at the moment, we know it's to the southwestern end of a river, It's at the north end of a lake and the southern end of a smaller pool lake. We know there's significant terrain on the west side of it, which will be the right hand side as we're navigating towards it. So it's a fairly good landmark, and also because it's a local area, it's somewhere we're familiar with, it's somewhere we're not likely to confuse. When you get further afield from your home base, picking those waypoints, choosing those waypoints is very important. So we're going to start our first turn on course at the moment. We're going to fly a specific heading for a specific time. So as we turn the corner, we're going to concentrate on establishing the heading accurately and then making a note of the time we've completed the turn at. So the time is 1/4 the hour. And what we need to do is to work out what heading to fly. You can see we've got a track of 260 degrees magnetic on the chart and a distance of 14.1 nautical miles. But we don't have anything on the aircraft that is really able to show us the course over the ground, because we've got wind pushing us from the north. So if I fly on heading 260 degrees, I'll end up flying a course that's slightly south of that. But fortunately, because we've got a wind forecast, we can work out roughly what we want our heading to be. Now this isn't a precise science, it's only as accurate as the weather forecast that we've got. But we can make very good use of the E6B for this. This is an online E6B from the University of North Dakota Aerospace Department, and it's quite intimidating to begin with, but it's fairly straightforward once you've done it a few times. There's some instructions up here, but we're going to do it a slightly different way. This is the wind side. What I can do is move this slide here, and the center point I'm going to put on my known airspeed, or true airspeed. In this case it's 90 knots. I'm always going to work in the same units, so if the aircraft is miles per hour, you either convert your wind to miles per hour, or you convert your aircraft speed to knots. I like to think about the aircraft speed in knots, so let's do that. Similarly, we have to work in either true or magnetic. Wind forecasts are generally provided as true wind. So in this case, the wind is 320 degrees true. I want to convert that to magnetic. In this part of Norway, the magnetic variation is 3 degrees east, so I'm simply going to read off the east side here. I'm going to pick 3 degrees, and that tells me it's 317 degrees magnetic. So I'll just bring 317 up to the top of the index there. There's an old saying that's variation west, magnetic best, and variation east, magnetic least. It simply means that if it's west variation, your magnetic value should be bigger than the true value. Having done that, with 317 on the index here, I'm going to come down. I've got my ground speed, my true airspeed of 90 knots. I'm going to make a little mark at 80, because I know there's a 10 knot wind coming from that direction. So if we've got a headwind, which, you know, this is the representation of the wind, I can move it around, and there's like a little cellophane sheet in here that moves your pencil mark with the E6B wheel. If I put the wind up here, the wind's coming from 320 degrees, we can see my ground speed would be 80 knots, because it's a headwind, and similarly, if I spin it around here, my ground speed would be 100 knots, because it's a tailwind. So it gives us a graphical way to look at the wind. I want to fly the aircraft on a heading of 260 degrees. So I put my desired heading, my desired course at the index here. And we can see that the aircraft will be moving this way, the wind is blowing it this way, and the ground speed will be about 85 knots rather than 90 knots. We can read the drift angle directly off these lines here. It's 246 degrees drift. That would give me a course over the ground of 254 degrees. Now I don't really want that, so what I've got to do is just do a little shuffle on this. I can see 6 degrees of drift, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my desired course about 6 degrees, and now it's showing me a 5 degree drift, so I'll just move it back 1. And now I've worked out if I fly a course, or a heading, sorry, of 265 degrees, then my course over the ground will be 260. That's because I'm flying this heading here, I've got the wind pushing me this way, so this is my actual course and ground speed. So 265 on the heading and 85 knots on the ground speed. It's very straightforward. What we need to do is to put that information back on the chart in a meaningful way. So you're going to ask me, why are we putting this information on the chart and not writing it down on a log sheet or another bit of paper? Well, quite simply, listen to the wind noise on the aircraft. It's an open cockpit aircraft. We don't want to have many bits of paper floating around. We want just one single, easy to use document. Maybe having a flight plan or a log is more suitable for a cabin aircraft, but annotating the chart is by far the easiest way to do this in an aircraft with a cramped cabin. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw some triangles on the map. These are going to be used to put the information in it that we need. These are the three legs we're going to use the information for. And the first bit of information we've got is the heading of 265 degrees. We'll put that at the top of the first arrow. I want to make sure that the arrows are not too close to the track line, such that they will interfere with the information on the chart that I really need, and I want to make sure they're not too far away so they're ambiguous. We're just having a look at how we're tracking at the moment. I can see the waypoint 2, or what appears to be waypoint 2, ahead of us. We've got a few islands that are good check features along the map, and we've been keeping an eye on some of the lakes we're passing over as well. So as well as flying the heading as accurately as possible, we're having a look at the ground features to make sure that we are tracking correctly as far as we can see, because remember, that forecast wind may not be the actual wind. The next bit of the puzzle we need to solve is how long it's going to take us on each leg. And again, we can do this by reference to the E6B. So we know that this leg is 14.1 nautical miles. What we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the other side of the E6B. This is the slide rule side. If you're doing this on your own, then it's useful to have the slide rule side and the wind rule side, or the slide rule side and the wind side open in separate tabs, because otherwise it resets the wind dot you've put on there, and it's useful to keep it, so just open two different browser tabs. In this case, this is our time index. The 60 rate is the time index. And if I set it to 90, if we're doing 90 knots, if it's 90 knots in 1 hour, then in half an hour it'll be 45 knots. So there's 45 nautical miles in half an hour. There's 30 minutes. Instead, what I'm going to do is slide that 60 index to the actual ground speed of 84. I'm going to read around the outside until I find my distance of 14.2, and I can see that that's roughly 10 minutes. So it really is as simple as that. We'll go back to our chart and we'll put that information on the chart. So we just add it into the centre of the triangle. We now know that we fly on heading 265 degrees for 10 minutes, and that replaces the distance and the course with a heading and a time, which correctly reflects the equipment we have on the aircraft. We can see this very obvious landmark ahead of us now. We've had a look at the photographs of the area, and we can tell that there's a little harbour down there, so that's a very obvious landmark. We can see we're in the middle of a big bay with lots of islands running southwest and northeast, but this big pointy land is the turning point. So very easy to pick that one out. And now we've got another check as well. We can use our clock. We can see that the clock is approaching 25 past the hour. We calculated 10 minutes and we turned it 15 minutes past, so the time gives us another cross check. The other parts of the puzzle we need to fill in are the altitude we're going to fly at. In this flight it's fairly straightforward, we're flying the whole thing at one altitude, but we'd like to have that on the chart. But most importantly, we also need to know what altitude is safe for us to fly at should we be lost or should we enter cloud. Now obviously without blind flying instruments on this aircraft, without gyro instruments, you really don't want to enter cloud. If you're flying a Cessna or something else with an artificial horizon, then you can keep yourself safe. It's far better to climb through cloud and bust some airspace than it is to fly into the hillside. So what we need to understand is what our minimum safe altitude would be. Little nav map is fairly useful for this. Little nav map is what I use to generate the map. And we can see at the top on the map itself we've got grid altitudes or minimum off-route altitudes, and on the profile view we've got a minimum safe altitude that it's calculated. The problem with Little Nav Map is we can't set the bandwidth of that elevation profile at the bottom. We can't set a channel, if you like, 10 miles either side of our route to identify terrain. It doesn't have that capability yet. So what we're going to do is simply use the grid altitudes instead. For the most of our route, the grid altitude is 3,600 feet. That gives us 1,000 feet clearance. So the highest terrain is 2,600 feet. With Little Nav Map, if the elevation of the terrain is more than 5,000 feet, it will give you 2,000 feet clearance. So where it says 8.5 out to the west, that indicates that the actual terrain there is about 6.5. It's good to have a little bit extra clearance over high terrain. But on my flight here, I know that for the majority of the flight, if I get lost or I don't really know exactly where the terrain is, I can climb up to 3,600 feet and be guaranteed that I'm not going to fly into anything. It's a good way to stay safe. So we put that information on the chart as well. I'm going to draw 2,2 to represent 2,200 feet. That's my planned altitude, my flight planned altitude. And I'm going to draw 3,6 to indicate the terrain clearance altitude, the minimum off-route altitude, and I would climb to that altitude if I got lost and was in cloud. As I said, in the PT-19 you really want to avoid flying into cloud. It's just not, it's difficult to come out of that the right way up. But if you've got a better equipped aircraft, it's good to have a strategy that works for that. So now we've done all the calculations for the leg. We're navigating comfortably on the second leg, so we can fill in all the details for the flight. We know that the second leg is about 10.5 minutes, a heading of 241 degrees, and safe at 3.6, planned at 2.2. We can see we're routing south of this long thin peninsula of land here, and this little island just underneath us, and that's exactly what the map shows as well. So as far as our tracking goes, we're pretty much spot on. That's all you really need to plan the route from A to B. It's very straightforward once you've done it a few times, and the E6B is very useful for doing this. Other applications can calculate the heading corrections, the wind corrections themselves, but it's quite satisfying to understand how the E6B works. There's one more part of the puzzle that as a responsible pilot we should consider, and that's the fuel state. Now I've been keeping an eye on the fuel tanks as we've been flying along here, and I know that I've got about 4 hours of fuel on the aircraft, and I'm only flying for 30 minutes, so it's not really an issue at the moment. Also, the fuel indication on this aircraft is fairly average, it's not very precise at all. But if you've got a more capable aircraft, again, it's great to have a strategy that allows you to deal with that. So what we need to do is to put some fuel rings in at each of the waypoints, and these refer to the waypoints themselves and not the legs. We'll draw these as circles, we'll put them on the outside of the turns, and again we'll make sure they're far enough away that they don't affect the symbology on the map where we need to read it. The first thing we want to consider is how much fuel we want to arrive at our destination with. In this case, I want to arrive with around about 10 gallons. That'll give me an hour minimum fuel over the destination. My final waypoint, waypoint 3 towards Hawksund, it's only 7 minutes from waypoint 3 to Hawksund. So I want to work out how much fuel I need for 1 hour and or 10 gallons. I know 10 gallons is 1 hour. I want to work out how much extra fuel that 7 minutes is going to need. And for that, I can go back to my E6B, because it's the exact same calculation. All we need to know is what the aircraft burns in fuel. So I know that the PT-19 burns around about 10 gallons per hour. I'm going to do exactly the same as I did with the distance. I'm going to put my index here, my 60 rate, at 10 gallons. If it burns 10 gallons in 1 hour, then in 30 minutes it burns 5 gallons. So it's very straightforward to work it out from here now. We go round the inner scale, and we can see that as we get back to 7 minutes, it's going to burn about 1.1 or 1.2 gallons. We can read that off here. We have to understand the decimal point and how this works. We've got to make some allowances for that. So we need to know which columns we're working in. But if this is 10 gallons, then as we go down, 3.5, 3, all the way down. So 7 minutes, 1.2 gallons, let's say. So going back to our chart, you can see that 1.2 gallons on top of the 10 gallons. So 1.2 gallons for the leg and 10 gallons as the final reserve means that we need 11.2 as the minimum figure when we get over waypoint 3. So hopefully that makes sense. And once we know that, we can repeat that procedure again, just stepping back one waypoint at a time and working out the amount of fuel we require minimum at each waypoint. 13 gallons, 14.7 gallons as we work back towards Jeddah. That's the minimum fuel figure, but it'd be nice to know what we actually expect to have. So we can work the same process except we go forwards rather than in reverse. Now the maximum fuel capacity on the PT-19 is 45 gallons. And let's just say that it burns 5 gallons from startup, taxi, takeoff, climb to a reasonable radius of the airfield. So we'll start off with a figure of 40 gallons at waypoint 1. And we just apply the same differences between the waypoints. You can see there's 1.7 gallons used on the first leg, so we take 40, we subtract 1.7, and it takes us down to 38.3, and then 36.5 for the next waypoint. We know that at any of these waypoints now, we've got about 25 gallons of fuel to play with. So if something comes up, if we have a task we have to carry out that we weren't expecting to do overhead one of the waypoints, we know what amount of time we have over that particular waypoint. So it's fairly useful. The top fuel figure is what you expect to have, and the bottom fuel figure is your minimum fuel to arrive with reserves intact. And you can also work out from that, if you use a consistent figure for your reserves, you can work out whether or not you have to divert due to fuel shortages. Our third waypoint is this island up ahead of us. It's an island at the eastern end of a narrow valley with a big rail yard just to the west of it and a north-south road bridge with a bigger lake towards the southeast. So it should be fairly easy to confirm that that is the waypoint we're interested in. We've also got the time. It was 10 minutes from minute 25, so that should be minute 35 as we turn over the waypoint. 10.5 minutes, strictly speaking. If you're flying your family along, one of the questions you may get asked a lot is, are we nearly there yet? So it would be important to understand how long it's going to take you from each waypoint. We've got the times written out. We know it's going to be 7 minutes from the final waypoint until we get to the airfield overhead, but it would be useful to have a cumulative time somewhere on the map as well. Unfortunately, we can put that in the fuel ring. I'm going to allow 5 minutes from the point we get to the airfield overhead until the point we actually land. I'll take my 5 minutes, I'll add 7 minutes on for the flight time, and that gives me 12 minutes. I can then add another 10.5 minutes, 22.5 minutes, another 10 minutes, 33.5 minutes. So at each of the waypoints, I know how much fuel I should have, the minimum fuel figure I need, and the amount of time remaining to the destination. In less than 25 minutes, we've been able to plan the whole flight. It's not difficult to do this sort of planning if you've got the right tools. If you've got a printed map, you have you can read the headings or the courses and the distances off the printed map. When you're doing it in software, if you're doing your map in Microsoft Paint like I've done, it's very difficult to put a protractor on the screen and actually read the headings. So having the navigation software to produce those headings, or those courses I should say, and distances is really useful. You can see we've just turned over the island. You can see the big rail yard down to the southern side of the valley, and we're just basically following the valley along till we find the airfield now. So this last leg is more of a blended approach to navigation. We're following the river and using the clock, but the heading is really, we know the heading because we're following the river, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's an acceptable method of navigating. So little nav map is very straightforward to use. You simply put in your departure and your destination and you pick some waypoints as you go. It shows you the true and the magnetic courses, the distances. It'll also do some calculations for you. You can put the winds in there as well. You can update it with Navigraph data, but it will read the data directly from X-Plane as well. If you want to use something more web-based, you've also got SkyVector. It does exactly the same job. You can get the course over the ground and the distance between waypoints. SkyVector will also do calculations based on the real winds. If you don't want it to do that, simply put the value 9900 in the Zulu field, and that will stop the wind calculations in SkyVector from happening. It really depends on what you want to do with the information, which source is best to use. I like Little Nav Map because it's got the ability to export the map as an image. Now you'll also see it can export the map as an image for Avatab, and that means it will georeference this map automatically with the yellow lines that I've drawn on it, and we can simply load that into the tablet in the virtual cockpit and follow the map with a little aircraft symbol. We don't need to do any of those wind calculations. So Little Nav Map makes navigation accessible if you've got Avatab in your simulator, but it's nice to learn the old skills as well. Of course, if you're going to use a tablet device in the simulator, you may want to hook up a real-world tablet to the sim and go flying that way, and this is much more like what I would do in modern general aviation. This is ForeFlight. I also use SkyDemon, and they're both subscription products, but they can both use X-Plane as the GPS position source over Wi-Fi, and you simply use your iPad as if it was in a real aircraft. You can see you've got all the same information on ForeFlight. You've got the course over ground and the distance. Because it's GPS capable, it gives you a ground speed and a track, which is really all a GPS ever needs to do. But with ForeFlight you've got the airspace information and everything else as well. If you want to take advantage of tablet navigation, if you've got an iPad but you don't want to pay for a ForeFlight subscription, then one of the other options you've got is this package called AirMate. Now it's a lot less feature packed than ForeFlight, but it's also free. You can buy real world charts through the application, but it's got a base map and base aeronautical data, so it's good enough for flight simulation. It's good enough for real world flying as well. It's designed for real world flying, but I think it's fairly useful, and for the price it's a really capable package. And again, you can use X-Plane as the position source, so you can have it tracking your progress as you fly along. You'll notice that my nav map here, it only has a very small amount of airspace shown. we can see we've got Oslo Airport at the northeastern end of the map. When when Little Nav Map starts up, there'll be a lot of airspace shown on it. One of the useful things you can do is limit the airspace display to the flight plan cruise altitude or below. Now it'd be useful giving yourself a little bit of margin on here. If you're going to cruise at 3,000 feet, then maybe set it in the application to be 4,000 feet, so that you've still got airspace a few hundred feet above you. But that takes you from a very cluttered map to a very simple looking map, and then you can go on and add the information that you want to the map. So there's multiple navigation solutions for the PT-19. And most of them don't have any cost to you at all. You can use the free SkyVector website and a free E6B calculator online. SkyVector will give you a wind corrected flight plan if you're doing real world winds, and if you're doing simulator winds, then you can use the E6B. It's not a complicated thing to do at all. It adds a little bit of realism, and most importantly, it gives you the ability to navigate any VFR aircraft regardless of what instrument it's fitted with, regardless of any of the instrumentation fit. You can navigate a VFR aircraft worldwide. There's no navigation databases to keep up to date, and there's no avionics to worry about. It's just a different set of skills. But you can see that with simple reference to the map, the compass and the clock, we've navigated successfully along this valley to Hawksund airfield, just coming into sight on the left hand side of the aircraft at the moment. Descending down to the traffic pattern altitude, and we'll join midfield crosswind for runway 28 at Hawksund. I hope the video made sense. I hope you enjoyed it. If you do have any questions about traditional navigation, then please ask them in the comment section. I very much look forward to reading your comments. If you're flying for real, in busy congested airspace, there is no substitute for GPS navigation in the modern age. This is a technique that's taught to private pilots during training, fundamentally to make them aware of wind drift and corrections. But with a tablet device and a navigation software package costing less than a couple of hours of flying, there's really no substitute for it. And then you can concentrate on enjoying the scenery and keeping an eye out for other traffic, which is by far the most important thing you can do in busy areas. In the next video, which will probably be the last video for the PT-19 for the time being, we'll have a look at doing some stall recoveries and some very limited aerobatics. I hope you join me for that. Thanks so much for watching.